And this was the first time I had a danger close bomb, a 500-pound JDAM. It was just like we're in the back. It was off to the right. It was close. It was really close. When it hit, that crunch and like the whole ramp and the vehicle just shaking, it was intense. But that wasn't even the fun part.
Welcome to Combat Story. I'm Ryan Puget, and I served Warzone tours as an Army attack helicopter pilot and CIA officer over a 15-year career. I'm fascinated by the experiences of the elite in combat. On this show, I interview some of the best to understand what combat felt like on their front lines. This is Combat Story. Today we hear the combat story of Jeff Depatie, a retired JTF2 sniper and assaulter. For those who aren't familiar, JTF2 is Canada's Tier 1 military force. Jeff deployed multiple times, both as an infantryman in the regular Canadian forces and again as a member of the elite JTF2. After leaving the military, Jeff created a company called the Special Forces Experience, which is a highly tailored process designed for men who have achieved their own version of excellence, but want to know how far they can really push their limits. In this episode, we not only dive into some of Jeff's combat experiences, but also spend time hearing Jeff draw on his lessons learned from that Tier 1 community and all the research that's gone into creating the Special Forces Experience surrounding human performance. I hope you enjoy his stories as much as I did. Hey, Jeff, welcome to the show, and thanks for taking the time to share your story.
Yeah, thank you, Ryan. Thanks for having me.
So I've done just a little bit of homework on your website, what you're working on, and a little bit of the background from what's out there on you thus far. Really excited to dive in. And what I like to do is starting out with kind of how you grew up. From the people I've interviewed, there seems to be a pretty good, it seems like some of them, the door kickers, which I would put you in that category, grow up with a gun in hand. Some do not. I'm very curious what your youth was like and how you kind of found your way to the military. So please let me know what that looked like.
Well, I was born in Northern Ontario. So, just on the edge of civilization, if you will. There's not too much north of where I was. There are some pockets of people, but not a ton. And I lived out in the sticks and loved being outside. You've heard the story, I'm sure, but hunting, fishing, all that kind of stuff. Yep. Guns were in hand. Even at like a little wee age, toy guns were in hand, and it was all make believe. I wouldn't say that I knew I was going to be a soldier, only because at that age, do you really know what something is? And, some people are able to stick with something for, that 20 years, whatever, say I was 8 years old and 20 years, they're able to be like, this is what I'm going to be. The only reason I say that is because soldier is such a broad term, right? Am I going to go down this path, into flight? What is soldiering? But looking back, yeah, growing up, definitely gun in hand and, me versus nature for a long time. And I like to live on the edge. I have ATVs, snowmobiles, and the very first parachute I had, I think I was 11 years old, and we had this double tracked snowmobile, and we rigged up like a paraglider, parasail behind this snowmobile, just like flying up and then slamming into the ground because it was a round chute with no venting or nothing. So it would just like catch air and then jam us into the ground. But it was always those kinds of things, Yeah.
That's awesome. So was this like your family? Would they take you out hunting or out into the woods, or was it more of a, hey, just get outside and get out of the house?
So my dad was into the outdoors. Well, actually, both my folks were, camping, fishing, snowmobiling, that kind of stuff. So I had a little bit of a taste of it, but yeah, there was definitely that age where it was like, get out of the house, go explore, and here's some stuff to do it with, and, have fun with it. And I definitely did.
Jeez. So what, was there a military background in the family, or did you just kind of find your way there on your own?
My grandfather was in World War II. He was one of those guys who was in North Africa. So he was a Scotsman. He was in the British Army, started off in North Africa, spent pretty much from 39 to 45 in Europe. Yeah, working his way up the boot all the way in, and never broke the rank of corporal. So He was that kind of guy. He was the guy who could get you stuff. And obviously he had a big old rack of medals, a lot of stories to tell, which unfortunately I never got to really hear them other from him. He died when I was really young. So there was that in my blood for sure. I definitely have the soldier blood from the Scott side, but as far as my immediate family, no, not really. No one really on my dad's side actually at all for a few generations. And then, my mom's dad, but I wouldn't say that, didn't condition me to move towards the military. It was just my attributes as I felt them out. It was like, oh, I can only do this in so many realms, maybe policing a little bit, maybe a little bit of, outdoor guide kind of stuff in a way. But as far as moving on and as I grew and wanted to start hunting people, if you will, there's only so many places you can do that. Right. So
right.
Actually moved me and I was pretty on the edge, and luckily I found that route because then it gives you a natural, healthy place to vector your energy when you're that kind of young man,
Was there any discussion with your folks, since they didn't have that background, about getting in and what that would look like?
Yeah. My parents were always supportive. They were the kinds of parents who weren't going to really say no, unless it was really going to either, not that I'm just kind of extrapolating here. If it was to hurt others or myself, they would be like, no, but it was always, okay, if that's what you want to do, go ahead. If that's what you want to go do. They were a little bit more hesitant at the time because when I first started applying, I was actually applying to the American military. I was unaware that Canada even had a special forces unit. So I was like, okay, well, that's where I want to end up. By this time I'm getting close to 20 and know a little bit more about what I want to do. And I had my paperwork in, and then 9/11 happened. And then the American military stopped taking foreigners, I guess, understandably. So my paperwork got pushed aside. So it was like, now what? So I went to the Canadian military, and it took a little while to get myself in there. Life can happen. I had to take care of my dad's business for a bit, and a few injuries, those kinds of things came up, finished up a little bit of schooling. So it wasn't until I was 25 that I actually, once all the paperwork got processed, that I was in fully.
Jeez.
It took a little ways.
Yeah. So did you enlist? Is that how it worked with the Canadian military, or did you go some other route to get in?
Yeah. I enlisted in the Reg Army. So, did my homework, found out, the best route to the unit I wanted to get to was through the infantry, through the airborne, hard in your body, hard in your mind, really. And then grab some relevant experience, and then get on selection, and then go into an SF unit.
And that was something, it sounds like you kind of knew you wanted to do from the start, was like that SF side of the house.
Yeah. Once like I said, when I was really young, I was just, here's what I'm playing with. And then as okay, this is what the military consists of, all these players, and this is what a soldier can be, from clerk to something else, And as I pieced it together, it was definitely the SF realm. At the time when I first started learning about it in Canada, we had a unit, actually it's more in the show right now, it's the old airborne unit. It was disbanded after Africa in I think the 80s or early 90s from Rwanda. But then we didn't have an SF unit. Once they were disbanded, there was, the dark ages of the Canadian military when they thought peacekeeping was going to be the way to go. And so it wasn't until later on, but the US had, SEALs, Green Berets, Delta, SEAL Team 6, even if you consider Rangers, SF, and like a whole pool of thousands of potential opportunities, right? So, but then after that shutdown happened after September 11th, I went into the recruiters, and they kind of closed the door, and they're like, okay, well, this just came out, and it's the paperwork now that they were looking for people more actively right from the recruiting side. Before, they were just kind of pooling from the military, keeping it really hush hush. And then, and I was like, well, there we go. Let's start training. And then it took a few years to get there. A couple things came up along the way, like a tour and a couple setbacks. But yeah, once I knew what it was definitely the special forces for me. Pretty much, yeah, 2001. That's when it kind of forced us out of it, because I would say that some of it was accidental in a way. We were assigned, the prime minister volunteered for the Panjway, which I think he had no clue. I don't think anyone really had an idea when it first kicked off, like the AOs, what's really going on. Because, people, were gathering intelligence, but we understand that ground truth really is quite a bit different. Yeah.
Man. And I was just thinking if, a lot of the units you just referenced in the US, Green Berets and Rangers and Delta and those folks, they've just been around for so long. So the people I've talked to who end up in those units are learning from folks who've been doing that for 10, 15 or 20 years. I was curious if that was kind of the experience you had, or if it was because it was so fresh. It was kind of people who were learning this at the same time early on, or drawing on lessons from the 80s as you described it.
Yeah, well, what I would say, so just like kind of a little more backstory on, say, JTF2 Joint Task Force 2 itself. It was started in the early 90s. So our equivalent to the FBI, the RCMP, didn't want to handle this portion of the counterterrorism mandate anymore. And it was handed over to a military unit. So they ran a selection and did all the workups and then handed it over to the military. Then the military's like, okay, well, what do we got here? Started getting some traction, did some deployments in there throughout the 90s up until the 2000s. And one thing that I think is a huge help is if you look at our allies, like you said, in a whole, our military is no stranger to combat, but our SF was now renewed, even though some of those airborne guys did go to JTF2, the disbanded unit. But we had the SAS to draw from, the American Tier 1. That's just exponential learning, right? When you don't have to learn our lessons the hard way yourself, when you got good teammates. So that helped massive amounts throughout. That's one thing about the coalition is the speed of learning, what can be bounced around, right? When you have multiple units from multiple countries learning multiple lessons, and it's all being shared for a common good goal. It's fast learning.
Yeah, that's true. So if we go back, then you're 25, you just enlist basically. And at our age now, 25 sounds young. I'm sure at the time it didn't, but were you kind of like the old guy joining up at 25 years old?
Let me do a little audit here in my mind. Surprisingly, no. Just coincidentally, no. Because when I went to my basic training, because of timing, so my sister was getting married, and I asked if I could just come in to my basic military qualification just after she got married. So that moved me so we have BMQ, which is your basic military qualification. And then because I was going to the infantry, you have your DP1, which is your infantry training. I wasn't on a BMQ with infanteers. I was on a BMQ with, cooks and Air Force people, not pilots, Navy people. Like, it was a hodgepodge, but it just happened to be the oldest group they ever ran through basic military qualifications. The average age was really, really high. So I was not around young people. And then when I went into the DP1, into my infantry training, surprising enough, I would say I was probably middle of the road, actually. We don't have as many super young people joining up like down in the US. That's what I think anyways. They're usually a little bit later after school, generally, instead of before post-secondary. So no, I wasn't really the
old guy.
Old guy, no, it was just fluke, I'm sure on a normal day I would be getting on the older side.
Yeah.
But like so said, that's young.
So you mentioned BMQ, DP1. These are all new terms to me, but is that kind of like your basic and what we would consider maybe AIT, like your advanced training, DP1?
Yeah. So BMQ, think everybody who joins the Canadian Forces goes through that. It's ran a couple different places, but really there's one big place. We call it the Mega in Saint-Jean, Quebec. that everybody who, whether you're going Army, Navy, or Air Force, everybody goes to it. And it's to get you ready for the Canadian military. It was 13 weeks, 14 weeks when I left. They're always adding, adding new things, taking off things that don't work. But it gets you kind of ready to fire a weapon, gas hut, how to march around, all that good stuff. And then I went off to my DP1, which is my infantry training. So that's another part of me. There's actually another thing in between there. When you go to the Army, you do your BMQ and then you do a soldier qualification. I believe you still do that. So that's a few weeks. That's everyone in the Army. And then after that, I did my few months, 3 months or 4 months. I can't remember what it is now, of infantry training. And then I'm deployed to a company. Okay.
And when do you do airborne then?
So the way it works for us is there's a few different times you can do it depending on what's going on. You know how it is. Like some things aren't cut and dry, right?
Oh yeah. Same for us.
It can get pretty convoluted. So for me, another, just one of those things, kind of a lucky stroke. The unit I wanted to go to, 3RCR, the 3rd Royal Canadian Regiment, each of the 3rd battalions holds an airborne company, airborne company. And the one I went to, most of the people who were in the airborne company went to starting up Canadian Special Operations Regiment, which is kind of the other part of CANSOFCOM. So we got Joint Task Force 2 and CSOR. So it was like an empty house. So that they knew that my whole DP1 pretty much was going to go there, and they were going to go right onto their jump course. So pretty much, I think within a month or so, I was on my jump course, getting slammed into the ground.
Nice. Yeah. So I assume it was static line jumps at that time?
Yes. Yeah. So, most in the Army, usually you still do static line round shoot. Then you'll go up in qualification to static line square, and then you'll go up to like an accelerated free fall kind of thing. You can climb your way up like that. I don't know why. Oh, it's probably a NATO mandate. I think, aren't you supposed to have like a certain amount of airborne, like round dopes on a rope? You got to keep qualified to be part of NATO or something like that. Because it doesn't make sense. It's like, why are we doing this? This is crazy. It's a good time. Definitely hardens you up, but it's like, are we really going to be doing this?
We're not really going to be using this. Yeah. No, I hear you. I hear you. I interviewed a guy who was in, a guy named Jordan Becker. He's still in, but he was SF. At the time, he was just a regular infantry guy in the 173rd, and they jumped into Iraq early in the war. And, like they jumped into a secured airfield. The way he describes it is kind of anticlimactic, even though it's technically a combat jump static line. So yeah.
I'll say this. Okay. I'm familiar with what you're talking about. I don't know all the ins and outs, but I know what op you're talking about. Yeah, there was a few other ways you could have skinned that cat, but I think good on you for doing it too. Like sometimes, every now and then, just because you can, you should, just to keep that alive. But yeah.
Yeah, he was saying, like, just a funny anecdote is they were jumping. There was an Air Force colonel jumping with his company. And the guy had no rucksack or gear. He was just jumping in like
board shorts on.
Yeah, ready to go, man. So I just want to ask this. I am sure I'm going to ask you this question, and you're like, God, every American asks me this. But like, is it just unbearably cold training when you do this up in Canada, the infantry training world there? Like for us, if you go to Fort Drum in the infantry up at upstate New York, like it's going to be pretty brutal, or Alaska. But I would just imagine in Canada, that's just, everybody's going to get exposed to that pain.
Yeah, where the main infantry battalions are, it's right in that jet stream of super cold. Minus 40 is not an unusual winter. I don't know how many times you're out there with the toboggan and snowshoes, and you're like set up your tents and they're just full of ice and it's freezing, and you got maybe seems like 20 layers on just to try to stay warm. And then you start walking and you're down to your t-shirt, and then you stop and you're free. So yeah, it can get cold for sure. The trick is we do lots of training down in the US.
Okay.
One, because well, for the last, what is it, man? It's been 19 years.
I know, it's crazy.
It's been a desert war, so there's no point in really prepping in the snow too much. And there's just certain things it's just better to do in the warm. You got to be able to do it in the cold, sure, but to get it done quicker, to learn it faster, and then you come back and then you apply it, because you got to think in the infantry, you're shooting sometimes with mitts on. It's so cold. So, okay, how do you do that? You got to drop the trigger plunger. Like, it's just a whole new game, right? And then survival totally changes when you're living out of your ruck, and Mother Nature's trying to get you at every turn.
So you just brought that up. I just want to dial in on that a little bit. Like, if you're shooting in the cold weather like that, obviously I was a pilot, so I haven't had to experience that pain, but is it just like a cutout on the finger so that you have like access to like flesh on the weapon? Like, how do you handle that?
So there's a few options. Once it gets a certain level of cold, you have to wear mitts, unless you're really moving. If you're moving, you can survive with gloves. But at a certain level of cold, especially as you move towards the Arctic, you have to wear mitts. There's just no way. And there's no way you can put skin on steel. If it was a combat situation, sure, you're willing to sacrifice some skin. But actually on the gun, right where the trigger is, you can drop the plunger and you can shoot with a mitt.
Huh.
It's kind of cowboyish, but you can, so we have that on our guns, so you can drop it down, shoot with a mitt. We do have some mitts with like single fingers and stuff like that. But that's for like the regular infantry, you know what I mean? If you're doing high speed CQB or something, you're going to want to really go down, so you got a good trigger finger on there.
Okay. Man, that's cool. All right. So you're 25 when you sign up, you go through this training. How long is it until you're deploying, I guess, that first time?
Life's all about circumstance, isn't it, right? When we got in, or when I arrived finally, my unit had just gone. So I had to wait for that, deployment cycle to come back around. And then there was a second thing that started to happen. So when we first were in Afghanistan, there was a lot of, driving around in Jeeps. Well, what do we call them? Iltises, things like that. Super light skin, not cut out at all for IEDs, and the recoilless rifles, anything like that. They were just getting eaten alive. So we started to armor the light infantry battalions, and we mostly with the LAV 3. I think it's Striker is probably what it goes by in the US. And then it's got multiple variants. Most of ours were the one with the 25 millimeter Bushmaster cannon on there. So we had to also go from light infantry, living out of a ruck, to mechanized. So we had to get all these vehicles. We had to get everyone trained up, drivers, gunners, all the jazz, right? Get the mechanics qualified so that our battalion can go over. So that added a little bit more. So it was probably, by the time I was in the battalion, it was like 2.5, I think, years, almost 3 maybe. Yeah. Before we
from the time you enlisted, or from the time you got to your unit?
By the time I got to my unit.
Oh man. All right.
Yeah, enlisted, it was 3 years, I think. Yeah.
Okay. Got it. And man, people who listen to me, I ask this question often because it weighed on me when I arrived to a unit that was deployed at the time, 03, 04, they were in Iraq. And, I'm like the new guy, they just redeploy. You mentioned that you arrived, the unit's gone. Did that weigh on you? Like, oh man, I might miss this war, or I'm going to be the new guy. Everybody's going to be a combat vet. Yeah,
wasn't that something in the psyches, especially after 2001? Everyone knew what they were going to get into. There was 2 well-developed war zones, so you were going for a reason. And yeah, that thought of not going, I don't know if it actually. There's always the questions to the guys who got to go. Hey, what's it like? Oh yeah. Tell me all about it. But there was no doubt that we were going to be going. Just the pace, there was no. I don't even know if Canada started talking really. Man, it was well after 2010, 2011 before the chat of even pulling out, or not even pulling out, just dialing down started happening. So it was like, there was no issue of not going. It was just more like it was a prolonged, okay, what's going to happen when I do go? I think there's some pros to that though, where you get to think about it a lot more. And I do believe, it's not the only tool out there, but deep visualization of what you're going to get into. You're getting all these intel reports back, and everyone's like, you're kind of developing that battle space before you even go. So it helps your psyche prepare for it, helps your unit prepare for it, because we were, it must have been 7 years in by the time we went. Our strategies had changed and developed, and our capabilities grew in order to meet the demands that the enemy was throwing at us. So that was a pro to it, but also, waiting's the hardest part sometimes, right?
Yeah, no, for sure. Actually, interesting you mentioned the deep visualization. A few of the other folks that I've talked to, Dale Comstock, Tom Shea, these folks talk about this, also tier one operators. Did you develop that early on? Was that something you kind of learned through training when you were at JTF2? Where'd that come from?
That specific part, I was always one of those dudes who's on a knowledge quest, right? How to sharpen my own nature, build up my body and my mind. So that one I'd already kind of had in my bank. It was honed later on. As I moved into the SF world, you move into a whole different realm of tools and access for that capability. But no, I ran through it a lot. I wanted to make sure that if, when I got to kill someone, I was ready to do that. When, women and children are running and screaming, I was ready for that. When people were dying, when your buddies are dying or getting shot, or whatever the circumstance, the only one that I really never, I'd be lying if I said I fully wrapped my head around it, was, getting on an IED. I was okay with dying. Like I'm still, like I'm not, I don't want to die, but I'm okay with the concept of death. But losing a limb, I was never able to be like, okay, yeah, I'll fucking bounce back from that. So I always got to hand it out to those guys and gals who come back and like start just own that shit and do really great stuff with it. Cause that's a tough one. That one's it's like, okay, well, this isn't part of the norm, So yeah, visualizing all that stuff. I remember dreaming about it and prepping, but that's what I think good soldiers got to do. When you're a soldier, you got to focus on soldiering, which kind of, could suck for the family a little and all this, but in order to really make sure you come home to them, or to make sure you psychologically come home to them, you got to be in that pocket really good,
If you don't mind spending a second on it a little bit longer, Jeff, I don't know if this is something you work on with the company now, but for the visualization, like what did that look like for you when you did that? Maybe pre-deployment, during a deployment, how did you approach that?
When it comes to any moment in time I can conceive of, I break it up into 3 parts: before, during, and after. What I do before, during, and after, they'll have similarities and through lines, but what I do before, during, and after is going to be a little different. Take afterwards. After something happens that you may not have fully conceived of, you have to get it out. You have to express it. Can't stay locked up in here. We can't have your amygdala fired up and burying those deep into your hippocampal memories and creating bad habits afterwards. So what you do after is a little different. What you do during is a little bit different. During, you're usually maybe breathing to keep calm if you're not calm, but you're there doing the business, right? One thing I think that people may not fully, not that they don't get it, but the modern military in the West is well trained. Soldiers are well trained for what they're usually coming up against. Doesn't mean they've bumped into every scenario that can happen, every outcome, every probability, but they're well trained. So when you're in the moment, you usually have your algorithm of do X, Y, Z, of Z's happening, right? But yeah, running through in your head in a more contemplative state. I like to get a little bit more, I guess we'll call it theta. So, beta, alpha waves, delta, or theta, then delta. Basically, that means from high concentration, high focus thinking, upper cerebral areas, and then kind of bring it down a little bit more to where it's daydreaming. That's where I like to do my contemplating. It helps bury those memories a little bit deeper. So you're not like trying to focus in those memories, but you're not quite like meditatively releasing all thoughts. You're just dancing with it in between there, letting it happen to you, letting it accept it, feeling out the emotions, and then kind of programming in your new reactions to it.
And you would use that like you're getting ready to go on a mission, and you kind of go through that sequence, obviously the before, during, and then after, but that the before is more of the thinking through, all right, we're going to roll in this type of vehicle, we're executing this operation, and you're kind of thinking through that.
So I'll expand on before a little bit. I think as atomic structures, you got to make sure you're atomically sound. Your physiology is good. Your psychology is good. Eating good, healthy foods, sleeping properly, emotionally expressing, working out, all the gamut of holistic health that we know to give your neurons the best chance. When incident happens, everything goes into overwhelm. You have the best chance to set up for that. So all that's going on, because that's just as important. If I'm drinking and I'm sleep deprived, all the things that just happen to be a little military, but and then you're over there and you're eating rations. Like, that's why you got to train, because your body's going to be in a bit of a deficit, right? Already, just by the nature of war. You can't be having in combat outposts, you don't always get fresh meals, if ever, so you're eating high sulfite foods with tons of nitrates and stuff like that, which doesn't really help your sleep. So you want to maximize those things. But then whatever the op is, right? So you get kind of mission briefed up. How much time do you got? You got to prep, whatever. Sometimes you got to roll it really quick. If you don't have that, you do what you can on the fly. So back to visualization, whatever the new op is, how will I react in this? So it's a bunch of like if then contingencies too. If this happens, I'm going to do this, and be thorough, like look at how flying, for example, I got my pilot's license when I was young. You know how you got your checklist? If this happens, you have this whole checklist to go through. If this happens, it's got to be that thorough. And that way there, what happens is, and I'm not a pro on this, but when your brain goes into overwhelm, it goes and it checks your upper cerebral functions for answers. If you've just visualized, you may not have done it, but if you visualize, the answers can be up there. And that helps keep you out of overwhelm, keeps you from going into fight or flight. And then later on, it helps keep you from moving into those post-stress kind of situations.
Yeah. Oh man, it's amazing. Just so many of you guys in this community. Just assume that at a certain point, it's like a psychologist is working with y'all on this the way elite athletes do. So it's very interesting to hear that you just brought it up too. So thanks for sharing that.
Yeah. If I can expand, just like,
please.
There's so sports teams bring in sports psychologists and everyone they can, and they keep it isolated so that their other team doesn't have those advantages. Where the military is like, let's bring in all the civilian experts. So let's bring in all the professionals. Let's bring in the military experts. What did you learn? AARs. Like, think about even in flying, how much information from lessons learned is being jammed in there. So you just get to a certain point where, it goes down to some factors. It's big. It's got a lot of breadth, but you got to talk about them, because the soldier will burn out, especially as you move up into the tier 1 realms. Your pace is so high that, you burn out. And if I can poke a little, we don't have pilot's hours. So just kidding.
We love those hours.
I totally agree with that.
And actually, just before we jump into some of the experiences you had on the visualization, when you mentioned the after portion, so kind of like releasing or letting the emotion out, I guess when you were in maybe a leadership role in some of these areas, would you try, like, was that on your mind with the other soldiers, trying to get them to talk about what just happened? Like, how do you get somebody else to release it if you know that that's something you should be doing, but maybe they don't understand it the way you do?
Yeah, so many factors there. But one, yes, a lot of soldiers, when they're in the military, naturally do this already, right? Smoking and joking. It's that term has been around for how long? And that's what happens, right? You go on mission, you're smoking and joking, and hopefully those things are, when that happened and this happened and this happened. Now, that's not always going to get it, right? Because if someone's in overwhelm, they're going to be going inside. And one of the first things they do is they start to socially isolate. So if someone's in a leadership role to help prevent some kind of operational stress injury, as soon as someone's socially isolating, when everyone else is like high-fiving, or not high-fiving, you just lose someone.
Yeah.
You got to move into laughing. You got to move into talking. So thoughts, emotions, and impulses, they're all neuronal functions, but they're a little bit different, right? You can control your thoughts a little more than you can control your emotions, and a little more than you can control your impulses. But you need to regulate them and express them. And a great way to do that is talking. That's the first simple step. So as a leader, gentle nudges, help pull them out, help them in the cycle. And I won't get into the depths of what that cycle is when they're in that overwhelm, but you have to help break it, because what you don't want to do, especially in the first 2 days, is allow it to build, allow that memory to stay hot stove, red hot. You know what I mean? You need to start to loosen it. They kind of call it, I think, demyelination of the emotion from the memory. If the memory stays attached to the emotion, then that's where it's going to be dangerously locked away. And if we can start to move that away, and then just if there is leaders listening, if there's shame attached to it, oh, I should have did this, I could have did this. One, the situation's gone, and you got to just move on now. So figure out how to make sense of your new reality, or adopt a new reality of who you are. It's that simple. Because if you try to hold on and you try to put square into circle, it's not going to work.
Yeah, man, no, that's very interesting. So then, Jeff, if we jump to maybe the first time you're in combat, could you just put us, where are you? What year is it? Kind of like, what is the mission set you're doing? And then take us out on your first mission, what it felt like for you.
The first time was not like a glorious mission. It was literally, we got into Afghanistan, and I'll back up in a second, and we just had to move to our combat outpost. It wasn't like, hey, this is a big objective, 10 moving parts, air stacks and stuff. It was very relatively simple. So we got into our platoon, flew into Afghanistan. I think it was late September 2008, I believe, late September. Sometime. Okay. And normally moving into the winter months in Afghanistan, it kind of quieted down.
Yeah.
They didn't like to fight in the cold or whatever. But this actually turned out to be the worst winter and one of the deadliest, summer winter cycles there was. It just, they were like, no, our strategy of hiding out is not working. So all we did, we flew into Kandahar airfield. We spent, I think, 2 nights there. What we were doing is just getting our labs ready to roll out up Highway 7. And then we were heading into the Panjway, and our first stop was a mountain combat outpost called Masamgar, just by the edge of the Arghandab River. So we're driving out, and, a lot of people say these kinds of things. There's culture shock, and then there's like culture shock, right? When you step into the Panjway, it's a different place. It's a different realm. They've really held on to their past pretty strong. And, so we're going through there, and just quick side story. As we're moving in, this is when they're building Highway 1. So Highway 1 goes from Kabul. It might actually go around the whole country, but for sure from Kabul to Kandahar, and then kind of back up to the north of Afghanistan. It's kind of like a ring road, but it was IED Alley was its nickname. And what they're doing is they're fortifying it, right? Pouring cement, asphalt, cement, so that people can dig in. Or it was very obvious that someone had just laid in an IED. And we were going, and, we're all on edge, because this is literally our 3rd day in country. And we were in Kandahar airfield, which really was like, it's like a suburb, no, not a suburb, but like, it's pretty chill. Like, it's not too high intensity there. So this is our first time out, and we're like, okay, this is the real deal. We see these construction workers, on edge, and they're acting a little bit funny. What they're doing doesn't add up. And then, anyways, we kind of mark and record, head to MSG, Masamgar. That's mountain. It was on the side of a mountain. It was the worst thing there was. Turns out we report it. The OP's watching it. They dig in one of the biggest IEDs that was found in that area. That's what that suspicious activity was. It was like hundreds and hundreds of pounds of whatever, the ammonium nitrate or whatever they were using. Just that's day one. Get to the MSG. It's on the side of a mountain, and they would just like lob rocks rockets at this thing. You know how like they're not looking to stand and fight. They're just like launching in things and getting out of there. Next day, we load up, pack up all our labs. We had a tank escort, so Leopard tanks, similar to the Abrams, a big guy. What else do we have? I can't remember if we had E-Rock, but we definitely had some EOD assets with the Badgers, which is another like form of tank, with the rollers, with the whip chains, like the whole thing. I didn't know what we were getting into. What we were doing is, as soon as you leave the mountain, there's a road, but then we were hopping into the riverbed. It's dry at this time of year, and no one's been up or down it. It must have been years. So they knew there was going to be some stuff in there. And it seemed like we left, and it must have been like even 8 minutes later, first contact. So mortars start coming in, and then the recoilless rifle, like just missing like this giant convoy. There must have been like 15, 20 vehicles. We're all spread apart and stuff. Everyone's armored. And we're like, okay, what's going on here? And within minutes, we are a gunner. So we're in the lab. I'm not a gunner. I was in the air sentry or driving when I was. But you got a screen in the back, so everyone can see what's going on. And we pull up beside this broken down wall, and there they are. I think it was 3 of them lobbing mortars, but they didn't know we saw them. And the lab has 2 guns on it. One's a 25 mil Bushmaster, and the other one's it's an FN gun. It's a 7.62, but it just like, that's crazy. Anyways, just mows them down. So this is the first time I see people mowed down. Like it was I always felt like, what are you guys doing? You're so out of your league here. Everything we have technologically, not to mention our will, is just let it be for a bit, Anyway, so that's the first little bit, and that was within no time.
Jeff, in that case, so you were sitting inside the lab watching this happen, and you're kind of observing at this point. You pull up, you see these 3 guys, they're taken out, move on.
Yeah. So unfortunately, what we did at that time is we just stayed hatches down. So we really wouldn't have been much good up top, just blasting our small arms. Yeah. Oh man. Yeah. Now then shortly after, right from like the same area. Yeah. Now I remember. It was the first time I seen a tank shoot a group of people with, I don't even remember what round it was. It was crazy. It was crazy. Just to like, where there was a group of people, now there's nothing. It was intense. And that was pretty much the same engagement. Yeah. So we're still hatches down, but we're driving. We still got, this must have been like mile 1 of probably 15 miles of riverbed that we got to do. And it was, honestly, I'm not even kidding you. It was like that all day. Small arms fire so the riverbed's quite wide when dry. And they're all on both sides of that, right? The Panjway, and then, just north, you got the Hellman kind of crew pushing down. Small arms fire, some more mortars, that kind of stuff coming in. I don't know how the hell no vehicle got hit. The batters and rollers blowing off IEDs. I think there was 4 of them that went off. And then as we got closer, we kind of got pinned down a little bit more. Not a super pinned down. Like we could have just punched out of there. When I say pinned down, I mean like, okay, we got to deal with this pinned down. Some guys, and this was the first time I had a danger close bomb, a 500-pound JDAM. It was just like, we're in the back. It was off to the right. It was close. It was really close. When it hit, that crunch and like the whole ramp and the vehicle just shaking, it was intense. But that wasn't even the fun part. So we're still going. We had to drop off a few guys at one of the combat outposts along the way, Haji something. Can't remember what it's called. And ours, where we were headed for the next month, was up the ways a little bit. And we get in, and of course we're under contact. The group that's there, like, we don't even have time. We're like almost high-fiving outside the vehicles. No time to chat. Got to get out of there, because we get in and we're being mortared. And it's hitting around. They were a pretty decent mortar team. So you could tell when it's a seasoned mortar group versus some noobs. These guys were pretty seasoned because they actually hit inside the cop. And but we ended up calling in artillery, I believe it was, that night. It was either artillery or a Hellfire, but I think it was artillery that got them. So for a little while, every time we got mortared there, they were all over the place. They didn't know what they were doing. But that was quite the first day. It was like Okay, so this is what it's going to be like, huh? Okay.
Yeah. Dude, I don't know why you're saying this was like some nothing mission. I mean, I don't know. I mean, contact day one on your first move outside the wire sounds pretty hairy, man.
Yeah, well, that's exactly how we were. We were like, oh yeah, we're just moving to the combat outpost. Oh, okay, we're gonna get in our big green vehicle and drive there. And it was like, oh shit, no, this is okay. And honestly, it was a great prelude to what was coming. It was pretty intense most of the tour while we were there.
So if I could just ask, what was the sentiment like in a Canadian force at that time? You know, like 2008. And I can appreciate what you just said about the intensity in the winter months there. Like I was up in RC East at the time, and October was a horrible month for us. So in 2008, I definitely know what you're talking about. But just in general, like what was the sentiment from a Canadian force there at the time?
Yeah, what was it about October, huh? Because I remember that being that there was lots of death and a lot of stuff going on in that month. I would say morale was high. From my point of view, you know, and this is just discussionary because none of this is fact. It was kind of, there was moments where it felt like, are we fighting the Taliban or Al Qaeda? You know, I can't help but feel like, or is it just people who don't want us here? They don't understand, you know, that we're actually, you know, by that time, I think there was 6,500 new schools. You know, women were able to go to school, so there was so much good. The Afghani, their money had gone up like 49 cents or something. When I say we, obviously the coalition. So there was just this, they may not have known, right? Here they are growing their grapes in the middle of the desert. They might not know. So there was a little bit of that sentiment, but this is like every soldier would ever say this. Once bullets start whizzing, it doesn't matter. You are trying to kill me. You're trying to kill my buddy. That's it. All gloves off, you know? So it didn't matter. So there was a bit of that. Not much though. We felt pretty good. We were coming into that RAO had kind of, there was a good range of it where the battle groups before us weren't really engaging a lot, but it started just, if you don't get in there, they're going to start nesting in there, you know, and they'll start doing their thing. So that kept us busy and kind of away from all the politics of everything and what was going on. So I would say morale was pretty good. And you know, knock on wood, Ryan, we lost people, but we were very fortunate. We managed to like do a lot of work, like doing a lot of business, and we busted our humps though. We did change one thing, if I can add this. So remember I said we rolled in mechanized. As soon as we hit the ground, and we went back to walking. And we weren't just walking on roads and stuff. We were walking the most adverse paths and places that they wouldn't put bombs and couldn't really corral us. And it paid off, it paid dividends, because now they didn't really know where we were coming from. So we were able to start squeezing them. And we started pushing that East End more and more pushing them to the west at the time, towards Mouchon and what was it, Lancashire or something like that, out that way, you know, kind of pressing them along the Reg Desert to the west. The Panjway, you know, everyone's got their thoughts on it, but right in Zangabad, which was in the Panjway, which is part of the green belt of the Arghandab when it flows. So if you look at a map of Afghanistan, there's a big desert, the Reg Desert, or at least it was called the Reg Desert at the time. And then just north of it, there's this green patch where the Arghandab River runs down along it. And that's the Panjway kind of valley, I guess, in a way you'd call it, because it's pretty much a valley. It's got some hills and stuff in there, but it's starts about 15 kilometers outside of Kandahar city, and then runs about, say, 30, 40 kilometers, maybe 25 miles. And it's just above the desert there. But it was, you know, that was the birthplace of the Taliban, really.
So, okay, perfect. So if you can then, in that outpost, and God, that outpost you're describing sounds like so many that we supported up in all these provinces in RC East. You know, just kind of like a smaller unit up in the hills, getting mortared all the time. We'd fly over, everybody's gone, pop back up. Could you just talk through maybe one of the more difficult missions that you had there at the time?
Yeah. I will say this, just, as because I think it should be said, a lot of the Kiowa and Cobra pilots were in there. The Apaches were in and around. They were usually, let's just say, more in high profile stuff. But those guys were, because they're patrolling that a lot, right? And they're just waiting for the balloon to go up and something to happen. So I wanted to mention that for the helicopter pilot out there. They were integral, shooting pistol outside the door.
Yeah.
I loved it. It was so cowboy. It was the Wild West. It was great. There was ones that were more taxing and longer, big humps in, people shot, lots of contacts. There was one we went on, it was multiple days. It was just morning and night of contacts. But as far as difficult goes, because to me, difficult is when you leave it, it's like, shit, that wasn't really that good. It was one where we pushed pretty much to the farthest west of our AO, which was an area called Mouchon. And we flew into Mouchon, and then we went north across the river. We flew in, we took the Chinooks, flew across the desert. It was pretty cool. And we went in, and it was near the end of our tour. And it was one of those ones where it was like, what are we doing here? This just feels like someone's got us doing something almost just to do something. We're out of our depth here. And I know a lot of people know this exact scenario. I know this. Someone's sitting in a talk being like, this is going to be an easy one. And there wasn't like a ton going on. We patrolled, there was some little ticks and stuff like that, but it was, we lost a couple people. Well, we lost one person and then someone lost their legs. It was the same guy. A guy sat on an IED, killed him, and then a guy lost his leg. Not massive casualties. It was just the fact that everybody was like, what are we doing here? We're so close to the end, and we just did all this great work. And relatively, the infantry guys, the couple companies that were there, did really well. Got in a lot of fights, left a lot of hats on the ground, and pushed the AO, like really pushed them back out. So when we came back from that one was a little bit tougher, because now it's like, I can't really make sense of what just happened there. The sacrifice doesn't meet what the task was. And I know that happens quite a bit out there. And those are the harder ones as far as difficult in my mind. As far as like feeling like you're in the movies, it was definitely not that. But yeah.
No, I hear you. How long was a typical deployment in the regular Canadian forces?
It varied a little. I was there about 9 months.
9 months. Okay.
Yeah.
With an R&R or no?
Yeah, with an R&R. So we developed, I think it was kind of modeled after obviously R&R has been around for a while, but the Marines started doing one where, I think of the Marines, where they'd send troops away for a little longer, a couple weeks, a little bit more than an R&R. I went to Costa Rica. Yeah. But mine was right at the beginning of the tour. So the first month, 2 months really flew by, but the next, 6 months seemed a little bit
dragged on.
Yeah. You know what? I jokingly say I remember getting on the Chinook, flying out of the FOB we were at, FOB Spurlingar, and the ramp was open, and we were all kind of like really looking out the back, really melancholy, because we were leaving. It became like a pretty special place to us.
Yeah. Oh man. So did you, career-wise, did you end up going back did you redeploy in the regular forces, or did you then move into the SF realm after that deployment?
I moved into the SF after that. I got back, did my training. Once again, circumstance and fate kind of stuck it to me a little bit. So what happened is they revamped what's called the assaulter course. That's our special forces course for JTF2. And that backed it off. So at its predictable time, when it normally kicks off in January, it moved down into September or something like that. So it kept me kind of stuck in the battalion a little bit longer. Because by this point I was like, okay, I milked this cow, had a really good time, very fond memories there. but it's time to move on. So yeah, I started doing all my physical training, all my, we're just augmenting it, doing all the recommended stuff. And then did selection, and then I had to wait almost a whole year after selection, which normally it's only a few months. Yeah, it was, especially because they didn't hand out the acceptance letters like right away. Normally you get it within a couple months. So now you're just sitting like, okay, what's going on here? Just, yeah.
Oh, what they have you doing in the meantime?
Well, I was lucky. I moved they knew what my intentions were. So once I went through selection, they moved me into a different company, and I was like 2IC of, better term, like a motor pool or something, like taking care of some vehicles or something. It was just like, really, it just gave me tons of time to train. It was one of those places where they put people, hide them out as they're moving on to different things, nice. Which I did really appreciate. But as you can imagine, those are also the things that make time go really slow.
Oh, I'm sure. So if you can, then within the Canadian Special Ops, Special Forces community, you've mentioned JTF2. How does that fit into the larger SF community there?
So broad brush, think of something like maybe, at a time, SOCOM or something, and that's our CANSOFCOM. So it's Canadian Special Forces Command. Similar thing, different branch from, the Army, Navy, Air Force, or Marines in your case. In there, you have a Special Forces Aviation Unit. We have our, what's called CJIRU, which is like our nuclear, biological, chemical defense dudes. And then CSOR, which is our Tier 2 unit. And then JTF2, which is the Tier 1 unit. And then it has its headquarters, of course. So that's kind of broad brushwood.
And so when you assess, do you assess to go to, what you can share, Jeff, obviously, but like, do you assess to just get into that world and then they decide where you go next? Or are you assessing for a specific unit?
For a specific unit, yeah. So I'm not exactly sure how it works for the helo dudes. I know that they're all seasoned pilots. They don't take, first year guys. For that pool also is a little bit smaller, so they got to work with what they got. Not saying like, the wrong pilots show up. It's just, it's a smaller community. So if I wanted to go CJIRU, I would go do their selection. If I wanted to go CSOR, I'd go do their selection. If I want to go JTF2, I go do their selection.
And then I guess just the selection phase, is it as brutal as you hear people like going through BUDS for SEALs and Delta selection, that sort of thing, just a taxing, grueling experience?
I don't want to downplay its physical difficulty or its psychological difficulty, but if you remember at the beginning, I said we took over from the RCMP, and the RCMP had started developing a really, really psychological approach to selection based on character attributes. So something called directed data mining, where you go through scenarios over and over, and either you meet those checks in the box and carry on, or you don't. Of course, there's a high level of fatigue. Of course, there's low sleep. There's all the physiological demands that are squished. But I've never done BUDS. I have SEAL friends that I've spoken to about it. I've never done whatever the berets training is, the Q course, and their selection. I just have BUDS that we've talked about. Time-wise, ours is shorter. It's 7 days. So that does a few things. It's less taxing on the unit for force generation. I would say that the product on the other end is similar. It's similar for sure. But ours, it just has this little bit of a different flavor that I can't really articulate in words because it came from the policing world versus a long lineage of just military that has a few different little things in there. But like I say, it's difficult. It's physically difficult. A lot of people don't make it just based on that. And it's psychologically difficult. And a lot of people don't make it based on that. But most people, no, I won't say most, but a lot of the people just don't get picked up because of attributes. They just, their traits just don't match up.
Yeah, it's interesting. It sounds a lot more like what I experienced at CIA as opposed to the military. More of the psychological, certainly not physical at the CIA, but definitely more on the psychological side of things. One of the things I've noticed talking to, especially folks who are in Delta, is their selection heavily weeds out people who can't operate as an individual. But then they put them in a team environment. So I've always found this pretty interesting, where they're really like honing in on how do you make it through selection individually, and then we're going to pop you in a team. Was it something similar for JTF type selection, or the process itself, where they're looking for somebody who can make these decisions out on their own, and then they drop you into a team environment as well?
Yeah, a group of individuals who work on a team, right? So as you move up the echelon, you work in smaller groups, and that group could be you. So you've got to be able to be a one-man, whatever, army team, whatever you want to say. You got to be able to function independently 100%. But then most of the work is done in a team debt level size. So you got to be able to function on that. And like back when I said directed data mining with the trait attribute, it's not these 5 traits, right? It's thousands of traits. And what happens in there is you have like whatever personality brand you want to call it is over here. And then you have this guy, you know, he's over here, and this guy's here, and this guy's here. And you don't want one homogenized blob when it comes to problem solving, right? You want a group that has different perceptions with obviously some traits, right? High perseverance, physical tolerance, psychological tolerance, phobia tolerances, all those kinds of things have to be a check in the box, right? But then you want those different perceptions, and you got to be able to function on a team. I mean, when you haven't slept in days and you're rolling out real quick, back home, something could be going on, you're not, things are just not lining up, and you go out, you got to be a cohesive team. You got to know that when someone gives you that squeeze, or that person is with you, you need to understand that they're there with you at that moment. And not everybody can deliver that. And that's super crucial. I didn't know what to expect, because who really knows what to expect until you're in, right? The G.I. Joe juice monkey thing doesn't happen too often because they're so busy. Your pace is so high that it's almost impossible to keep up that kind of physique. There are some guys who put a lot of effort into doing it, and they really have to time manage. So that's kind of one of the illusions, but everybody there has high physical output. Check. Everybody there can work on a team. Check. Everybody there can work independently. But it seems, my experience with other tier 1 units is very similar. They're always very hungry to learn and very capable of adapting it. So something that people probably don't realize is the open-mindedness. If you look at like the 5-factor scale in psychology, and it's not the MBTI, it's slipping my mind, but open-mindedness is one of the traits. You have to be open-minded. You can't be closed-minded to be in these groups, because everything changes so fast. What was relevant yesterday is not relevant today, and so on and so forth, right? So people hungry to bring in new knowledge, and with that, it created this really beautiful culture of we called it the relentless pursuit of excellence, backed by a few other things. But man, it creates this really beautiful cycle. And, it took me a while when I moved out of the military to find people like that. The corporate world doesn't work like that. It's not generally, they think they're results driven, but they are not results driven. They just don't have the culture and selection tools to do that, really. So I would say that's one of the things I don't think people really can think of when they think of an operator at that level, of someone who's so open-minded and flexible. Adaptable, obviously, is a word you hear, but open-minded.
So I feel like that kind of leads into the Special Forces experience. And I would just ask if you can answer this, Jeff, great. If not, we'll move on. But if you could talk a bit about, without going into like where you were or mission set, but the first time you were on a mission with JTF, right? Or a mission that comes to mind, like some of the differences that you experienced with a with your regular forces, what that felt like for you at that level. And I guess just briefly, how long did it take from the time that you made it through selection until you're deploying with that unit?
So selection, and then our assaulter course, our operator course, is a year long. And then, man, we were doing tasks within, or I was doing tasks within probably months, if that.
Yeah.
You know.
So pretty quick then.
Yeah. Usually the idea is after that course, you're force generated to be deployed. And difference wise, it's just the caliber of tools and tech and money can help a lot.
Yeah.
But as you shave that ice cube, you know, and people who move up those in anything, I would imagine the same thing in the CIA, you're going to get a certain kind of person in some ways that is just not better, not worse, but just a different caliber for that job. And that always surprised me. You know, every dog had his day there, right? Where you'd show up, and whether it was competitions, shooting competitions, whatever, like, you know, everyone's competing for this, and it just creates this like really interesting atmosphere, because most people don't sit at the top, you know, like it's like it ebbs and flows, which is kind of neat too. And it keeps driving that pursuit.
You know, something that you just mentioned reminded me, speaking to Tom Satterley, who was a Delta operator, and then this guy, Greg Coker, who I just spoke to, who was a Little Bird gun pilot in 160th, which for me as a gun pilot is like, you can't get any higher on the pinnacle than that. But both of them and other folks I have interviewed have shared, like, when once you get into that culture, the community in the tier 1 world, there's this, like, every day you feel like you're being evaluated and could be asked to leave if you don't hold up to that standard. Did you feel the same thing in the Canadian side of the house?
Yeah, the term, and maybe you've heard it, but is selection never ends.
Yeah.
I jokingly say that to my wife too. But that is the culture, and it has to be. You know, some people are going to have down days, and that's totally different, and maybe even need to take a little bit of time off to recoup from certain things. But you gotta show up every day. You know, that's just how it works. The risk, the stakes are too high to not be that. So for sure, I would agree with that sentiment.
Yeah. And just quickly, how long did you end up staying in the unit?
I was there 8 years. I think it was. Yeah.
Was it pretty grueling, like taxing on you physically?
Yeah. Physically, like if I just like take a quick look, I broke my foot fast roping. Luckily my knees are good. I don't know how the hell my knees survived. I have this like huge clicking in my hips. I have a parasite that I picked up somewhere that is a little gift with me. My hearing's all messed up. Broke a tooth. Oh yeah, I got a couple tears in my shoulder. Not bad enough to fix. I got arthritis in both shoulders, and I have some TBI. I like to say some because I refuse to be like I got a ton of it, which I'm working through. I'm doing some therapies for that, mostly self and through I have a bioengineer friend, and then some doctor stuff like that. And there's a few other things that, like, you know, it stacks up. So physically very taxing, very, very taxing. That's that pace. The juice that they're able to squeeze from operators is pretty impressive, to say the least. And then psychologically, I think I fared pretty well. I was always, as you move up, usually people are a little more psychologically stable. Usually that's the idea of, you know, psychological testing. And then the training that helps make that a little bit more robust. And I avoided a lot of things that could lead down the path of not so good. You know, like I didn't leave the military disgruntled. I didn't leave the military and start drinking. You know, I moved out with purpose and stuff like that. So that helped all that. You know, got divorced. It was a little hard on the old marriage. That seems to be the MO there.
Yep.
Like I say, it's one of those things you kind of fall in love. She's a cruel mistress at times, but also an amazing place. I'm sure you're similar where you wouldn't change that. give that experience up for anything. I can't. I wouldn't.
Yeah. So funny you bring that up. So let's jump to what you're doing now. I'd love to hear about the transition you made out of the military. There's just two questions I like to ask everybody before jumping to that, if that's all right, Jeff. The first is, was there anything that you carried with you through your time in combat that had sentimental value to you, or was a good luck charm, something like that?
Yep. Two things. One of them, I don't know what the hell happened to it, but on day one, when we landed in Afghanistan, our warrant officer gave all the troops in his platoon a little St. Michael's pendant, the patron saint of paratroopers. I had that for a lot of years. I don't know what ended up happening to it. Wore that around my neck. And then my sister had given me very early on a little disc that said, I love you on it. And I carried that in my boot. I still have it in my shave kit. Like it moved from my boot to my ablutions kit, but that was always there. Because once you get a little deep in there, you got to be a little superstitious, just a little stitious. Because hey, this has been working. I don't want to mess with this, right? Yeah. So those were things I carried.
That's right. No, I can totally relate to that. And you pretty much answered this other question, but I like asking everyone just everything you went through, the pain, psychologically, family. Would you do all of that again? And it sounds like it's yes, but I still like to ask everyone.
Yeah. It is a yes. It's a resounding yes. I just, how it is, like you get a whole bunch of flashbacks of things and it's like, it's always, it was a yes. I like I said, I considered myself fortunate. I didn't have any major injuries. I was always able to keep myself, in my head organized. Divorced. When I was overseas in Afghanistan, actually, my wife she was 6 months pregnant. She lost our baby. That was right after 2 days of an intense op. So that was like when I was like, oh, okay, that wasn't part of the plan, So those moments, but that was nothing to do. There was nothing I could do. If I was there, I could support her a little bit for a little, but there's nothing I could have did. So I didn't have to hold on to that. So a big resounding yes. I got to meet amazing people from all over the world. And the military, if it's one thing it can give you, is a perception that you can't get anywhere else. And you'll see and do things you can't do anywhere else.
Yeah, it's funny. I don't think I've ever mentioned it while talking to somebody, but I have said this to friends where there's a lot of things that money can buy, but one of them, like you can't go back and do that again. Like what you've done, money isn't going to buy it. Like you gotta earn it. And it's a very select few who get to do it. So that's very cool. So let's talk about what you did when you transitioned out. You just described kind of like you couldn't find like corporate America, I would say private sector doesn't quite look at things the way that you may have when you came out of that tier one community. Was that kind of a driving force for the business that you started? And where did that come from? What was your transition like?
Transition. So I did a little bit of Special Forces Reserve time. So I was still able, so I was a jump master, so I was training on the hey-ho, on the shooting courses, all the things that were really like fun to do. I was still doing that. So I kind of had my beak wet a little bit and it was all not volunteer as in pay, but I went when I wanted or didn't go. So in between there, my wife and I dabbled with a few things. We started up we bought real estate, some commercial buildings and some residential or multi-unit triplexes, sixplexes, things like that, to invest in. And we opened up a co-working spot. That was one of the things where we started dabbling with community. All the while on the back, we were brewing up the Special Forces experience, which, it played in a little bit. So I don't normally say this, but kind of selfishly, I pull in all these, what I call high achieving men, to come out to the experience, but also then they're part of our network afterwards. And it's been really fruitful. It took a while to get to developing what the program is, the process. But it's been a fun experience. We did research. Okay, dove into more specifically, what do men want? What are men missing? Adventure, excitement, but how does that work with their hormones and their cognitive traits and stuff like that? And how do we create an event that puts them up against those walls that, the military is really good at doing. The military is very good at developing soldiers. So we use some of those methodologies to never develop people, because that's not our role. I would never be like, hey, this is what's best for you. The idea is that they come up against it and their personality either shines or doesn't. And then they get to see that feedback through team stuff, individual stuff, or of course our persecution.
So could you just share more about the experience for people who haven't heard of it? I mean, you just touched on some of it, but in a nutshell, what is it doing then?
So in a nutshell, anyone who wants to develop their nature, shift their perception, polish their steel, make their brain better, improve their cognitive functions, handle stress better, push their psychology, physiology to the max, just as like a litmus if they want. Most of the time, that's not what it is. Guys chasing things to put on their mantle don't do so well here. It's not a strong enough why to pull you through. But as they go through, what we do is we assess all those cognitive traits. So everything they do is made to put them up against it, to put them in different scenarios while going through, I think, a pretty awesome experience. So we call it like a heuristic approach, where they're experiencing learning, but being observed. And then unlike other places, we'll push those observations back in to see, is this actually working for you? What you're doing, is this actually working? Especially, not everyone's a great leader. So, that could be finagled back in because we don't have an agenda on the other end. There's no, like, we're looking for this. That's not what we're doing. It's an experience for men, an adventure. And it's been pretty great. It's kind of starting to branch in ways I never expected. Now we're starting to dabble with the mental health side of things. So we've really mastered a lot of things, like I said, about before, during, and after, because that's what we did. The process is spread out over generally about 8 months, and it's multiple phases, right? So phase one, kind of all the interviews and stuff, but we do their initial personality assessments. Then they move into phase two, which is a whole bunch they got to, mentally prepare. They got to do all that kind of stuff. They got to train physically, but then we have them combing through their lives, past, present, future, dig out, try to find those, like we'll call them childhood. I don't like things from their childhood that are built deep down in their brain that may not be serving them, in their new value systems. Because this is a big part of this, is finding your values, your purpose, or honing it a little bit more, or testing it. So then they work up, and then they go to the 8 days, which is phase three. And that like, as a broad brush, it kind of looks like a selection, if you will, but it's not. It has, we use guns and stuff like that, but it's not a selection. It's so they experience, it can really test who they are, and you're forced to grow in order to overcome every moment of it, because most people don't go through these kinds of things. And then afterwards, there's decompression and all the tools they need to not have their environment force them back into their bad habits, if they have some. I think most people have some habits or impulses that, we're constantly honing as human beings. Like, you don't reach enlightenment overnight. You gotta work towards it. So it gives them a really good chance. And then when they're done, if they make it through, which on the last serial, no one made it through, we send the profile of everything we learned on them. We send it to them. We don't, present anything as a strength or a weakness. It's just like, here's what you showed up, and this is what we've seen, and this is the feedback, and this and this. And we have some really cool esoteric stuff and some really cool scientific stuff in there. And then, anyways, that program now, we've been kind of starting to dabble with PTSD stuff in different forms, prevention or afterwards with some other programs. And then just recently, not to ramble on about it, but something I think is going to be really cool is we're doing, it's called ultra long range shooting, ultra LRS.com. It's an online e-course. It's 9 videos, all about an hour and a half, and is designed for anyone who wants to really start shooting a rifle, or is already shooting a rifle and wants to get very proficient, but delivered in a really non-polarized, way of shooting. We don't have any opinion. We don't talk about kid or anything. And really, the reason I feel kind of obliged to mention it, Ryan, is just right now with so many people buying all these guns. As soon as someone owns a gun and doesn't know how to use it, they're way more dangerous than if they know how to use it. So yeah, it's a little bit of that's going on, because I don't want to see gun culture go, even though I'm Canadian, so I have no say down here in the US. But it's happening up in Canada as well. And as long as people are responsible with them, it's hard for the government to get rid of it, right?
Yeah. Did I hear you correctly, Jeff? Did you say nobody made it through the last time?
Yeah, nobody made it through.
Because it's that difficult, huh?
Yeah. So one thing that's there's a lot. I keep saying one thing. There's a lot of things that are different than it being a selection. If I could get rid of the term special forces experience, I would. But just because I left that realm, and if I would have put Jeff Depatie's experience, people would be like, "Who are you?"
Yeah.
Who cares about that? So that's just the start place. But yeah, no one made it through. What's different is we can adapt things. If we see those little chinks, we can put more salt in those wounds until the lessons are learned, and that's where it gets a little trickier, because it adapts a little bit more. Like it's templated, of course, but and then also. I do have this theory that I like to kind of throw out there, but I think with COVID, so that was October last year. I think COVID has just rocked people's psyches a little more than they think, because right now there's this great unknown that's put over our societies. We don't really what am I going to be wearing this mask forever? Like, what's the plan here? What's the long term? Is COVID going to get us all? Is it not? Is it real? There's so much unknown, and the old neurocomputer can't handle tons of that. So even though lots of people are still functioning pretty good, I think it's there. And I think it was an extra psychological weight that they had coming into it. It's just a thought. No one mentioned it. It's impossible for it to not weigh on people. It's across the globe. It's everywhere. It impacts almost every day. It's got some kind of impact, so it is. So it's just a thought, a little theory I got. Also, it's a hard course.
It sounds like it. And you mentioned something there about people trying to find their purpose and what might be missing. From having done this for a while, do you tend to see similar purposes surface from the people who go through this? Like what they find as a part of this?
I'll just define a little so that we're making sure we're seeing up the same sheet. I think purpose for every human being is the same: to physically, psychologically try to be the best high vibrational, most considerate human being you can be, constantly crafting your own body. And as you do that through the years, you'll pick up skills and stuff like that. And that moves into what I like to call life's work, what you move into more and more, usually in some form of service, usually as people hone this, where they feel like they're giving back in some way. So in that, I would say there's similarities. As far as other similarities, a lot of them had some military interests, obviously. They have some kind of survival style interest, but as far as that life's work on the other side, or purpose as you're calling it, no. Some guys have gone home and wanted to just burn the whole thing down and restart and move in this direction. It's pretty interesting that way, because we just shock what's called your default mode network in your brain so much that it just forces a new perception. It takes off veils and forces a new perception, a new lens. We are doing a documentary on what we're calling the art of adversity. I think that's more the way I'll contribute that way.
Yeah.
TBD, it should be about another maybe 8 months before we're all done that. But it's the idea of it is before, during, and after. What did people do? We have one woman from Bangladesh who was imprisoned, political prisoner, beaten, lost her whole family, that kind of stuff. Well, what did she do now? Now she's in Washington and she's heading up this organization, a charitable organization. How did she do? Those kinds of things. Just to put it back out there, because I think a lot of people are getting locked up in a, what I'll call not such a healthy way. That's my opinion.
Yeah.
And I think a lot of it is fear locks them up and they're unable to move out and spread or beyond their comfort zones. And I think when human beings don't move out of that comfort zone, that's when you get bored and you stagnate. And I think that's a huge cause for depression. Like there's a lot of environmental causes for it, but I think it's a big one.
And then if somebody wants, like, if they're hearing this and they say, that's interesting, what's the type of person that you think this experience is geared towards?
So the process itself, we do make sure of a few things. One, there is some stability. Psychologically, you're stable. So that's part of all the interview stuff. Age, I don't want to put an age on it because I've interviewed some 18-year-old guys who have, like, they don't have it figured out because no one ever does, but they are so put together that they'll add something through osmosis to the group. And then you have a few guys, I don't really like to go too deep into the 50s, although I've had some people be pretty insistent and it didn't work for them because just the amount of physical strain. They would be amazing men because now, these are people who are growth minded, right? So they've been chiseling away. They've been working their armor for a long time. Their minds are much more stable. Their perspective is really good. They bring a lot to the table, but that's just not how the process is put together. So there's kind of a wide range of age. And then as far as when we pick the people who come out, we don't want that, we were talking about earlier, that same homogenized blob. We want people from as much background so that we can all grow together. That's the whole idea. Every time I see these people, I'm always amazed. Now we're at the point where we're feeding back in. So those guys who have made it through from 01, a few of them have been invited back as cadre and they work it and we keep that cycle going just to continue on and kind of spread the good news.
Yeah. Oh, very interesting. So last thing, I promise I'll let you get back to your day, but you mentioned that you got a pilot's license when you were younger. What was the impetus for that? And do you still fly?
So no, I don't fly right now. My medical has expired, but my plan is to get back in the saddle this year. So I'll just answer that one first.
Yeah.
How old was I? I think it might've been 19 when I started. I just, loved all of that kind of stuff. And, started off. And then at a certain point, this was before, remember I was saying about the American, going to the American Army. Yeah. I went into the recruiters and they were like, yeah, if you get your pilot's license before you come, we'll reimburse you. That was like, I'm not even like paraphrasing here. I think those were like the exact words. So I didn't know. I was like, okay, yeah, I'll do this. Cause I did at that time. I was still figuring out, did I want to go the pilot route or the infantry route? So I ended up started getting it and I got it pretty quick actually. And then that was just my PPL. And then I did my multi-engine and my IFR and a few other ratings like ski and float and did a bush course. Yeah, it was cool. I enjoyed it. What's that? Fixed wing.
Fixed wing.
Yeah. Okay. I have been, I'll be honest, I've been kind of having the itch to pick up something new and I've been thinking rotary. It's pretty damn expensive, but
it is
awesome.
It is. Yeah. If you do, Jeff, you got to let me know. I want to hear what it's like learning to hover after you've flown fixed wing. Cause obviously everybody I know has gone the opposite direction. So I'd be interested to hear when that happens.
Oh yeah. It's a chance. Right now I'm trying to pull some strings to see to make it more manageable. Mostly it's time, but I think it would be a blast, especially up north, getting like a little chopper with floats and man, you can go a lot of places with that.
It'd be cool. Well, really appreciate the time, Jeff. Thanks for sharing all this. Special Forces experience sounds awesome, although very challenging. So I'll have links to all this so people can find it. So really appreciate your time.
Yeah. Thank you, Ryan. It was great to be on.